Yo people, what's good? It's the Talk Says Podcast episode 2. Remember to like, subscribe, click the bell icon to get the notifications. And yeah, we are here talking about mental health amongst young people, amongst black men. So today I have Travis, who is a producer of the show, and we have Kit, who works with young people regarding mental health and stuff like that. So without further ado, we'll start. What are we seeing with young people regarding mental health like nowadays?
So like probably just to set the scene, so we're running a program that's around connecting young people with therapists. So we've been going into homes, going into like schools, going into like settings, and depending on which way they come in, we're seeing different things. So people are definitely like reaching out, say through social media, reaching out through email and a sign-up form, and they're basically saying that, especially through lockdown, people got affected by not knowing where the future is. We had people kind of talking about they saw deaths. There was a lad that got stabbed in Smethwick through the heart, and social media caught the way that my man literally just like you could see him.
I think I remember seeing that, right?
Yeah. People were talking about George Floyd, and it was just replaying in their heads, and they couldn't take it. And then at the other end, we got people that were like, let's just say they're on an ISS, like a supervision order and things like that, and no one's come to see them. So they're trying to think of their way after a sentence about how they're going to set their future, but they're not seeing their usual key workers. We've got people in care homes, not seeing anyone. So people were saying that feeling lost, isolated, neglected, feel like no one cares and the system doesn't care. And then you got people with, when you're looking at GCSEs, like, well, what's my future? Like, what do I do next? So it's that range of stuff on top of the usual like money worries. Like that's massively hitting people, kind of what's going on. It's a massive range from, wouldn't call it light level, but stuff that it's environmental. And then you got people where it might be potentially what they might call psychosocial, and then potentially as well some people with certain like maybe genetically some of their kind of things are representing and things are presenting that never used to present before.
So in terms of genetics, can you explain a bit more about that?
I mean, genetics it's a hard one. It's more a case of some people who've got conditions that were pre-existing, and it wasn't necessarily the environment that kind of triggered new symptoms. Maybe certain things have been going on for a while. You look at the parents, and the parents have both got some diagnosed kind of conditions. There's some young people that are on the autism spectrum, and there are new things presenting, you know what I mean?
And Travis, yourself, in lockdown, did you see anything?
Mostly on social media, you'll see like some of the news that was coming out during social media, you can tell that like something's not right with some people. I think there was a video I saw where a guy was like shooting guns at the top of his apartment building, like air pistols or something, and the police had to come and get him, and they said like he had some mental issues, and that was during lockdown. So I think just being locked down and without getting any like support or even just being able to go outside is really affecting people's mental health.
And yourself, Kit, like what stuff were you seeing in particularly like young black males?
I think like if we're gonna quickly kind of go with like lockdown and some of that what you were seeing, like I think you remember when everyone was talking about the parties and the raves and like hands up if you know what country they got up to, you know what I mean? So obviously you saw everyone's having like everyone's having a shubs, like a motive here, motive there. Did you hear about the one like jury court away where there was like, I don't know, 25, 35 people kind of got busted. No, and like it was next to a building that used to be like a church as well. But like, what kind of is worth noting is that when people are going through things, like the way the average human works is we're trying to kind of figure out how we're going to get to a place where we want to be. And every day you're kind of figuring out, okay, well, today I know that I'm stuck in the house. And I'm certain it's not going to make me happy. Okay, so I know that staying where I am isn't going to move me forward. But if somebody's now got a rave or little motive, house party, whatever you want to call it, and I know there's a 50% chance of me getting caught, the way the human mind works is, do I want a hope and a chance of something better, or do I want to stick with the certainty of what I know is making me unhappy? And I feel like that's one of the things that we need to be paying attention to, where like lockdown mixed with like lockdown is very similar to the reason why people turn to drugs and alcohol. Like, you know, you're unhappy staying at home, so I'm going to take the risk of doing something because it might potentially help me not feel at the level I feel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I've got a certainty of being unhappy. I need a hope of something changing. So that's the same with why we do drugs. I know without the drugs, I'm unhappy. So now I need something to at least help me escape for 2 hours, 3 hours, half an hour, whatever. We're seeing that there's not enough education about the healthy ways to cope.
Okay. Yeah.
And or the trauma that you're facing is trauma. Like, I don't think we're yet defining trauma. We're using the word a lot more, which is, you know, banging, game on, let's go. But now it's like, well, what does it really mean? Because there's things that we are saying that are normal and, you know, typical or whatever, but it still doesn't mean it's not trauma. Just because you can point to 6-7 man that's going through the same thing doesn't mean it's not trauma. If we're looking at, like, say, solutions just yet, like defining trauma and helping people understand that those little things that we do as a community, they affect people down the line. Like, I mean, like, I could go deep, but I'll let you lead it so I don't go too far.
So last week we were talking about men in general, and mental health regarding men, and we talked about the stigma of like what people that go through mental health sort of face, and then we kind of went through just trying to catch you up on what we've been talking about. So have you noticed anything regarding sort of, we talked about black men, but other races, is there a difference in like behaviors that they're exhibiting, or is there sort of like, what are the kind of differences that we're noticing? So that's
a deep question. That's a deep question. I think if we're looking at kind of like classical diagnosis of whatever it is, then on average, you know what I mean, like certain disorders appear the same way in everyone. I think one thing that needs to be like deeply discussed is how people, what the journey is, what the pathway is. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So something that we're seeing for sure is that for young mixed race boys, there's definitely a certain type of identity issue about the other half of their identity. Yeah.
Yes.
So if it's like black Indian and black mixed with Indian, there's normally like they're more, they know one side better than the other. If it's like black and white or black and Eastern European, which we're seeing, they know about one side more than the other. The other thing that we kind of see, like, let's just say in our project with Asian males, we were seeing that some of the causes of some of their challenges was actually around sexuality. And I think something like 6% of the males of like South Asian background, some of the kind of the triggers were them trying to come to terms with like their sexuality, and they're needing somebody to help make sense of it, but they also want someone that understands the culture. So for us, we're able to kind of then go, okay, well, here are the LGBT therapists or mind managers, but also the ones that come from this part of you know, the South Asian, like, you know, continent, like who's got an Afghanistan background, who's got Indian sort of background, and in there as well is like language and understanding all the subcultures. So there's some things where it's like some patterns that you're seeing, but like I say, you know, it's if we go too narrow, it will look like they're all different. They're just interesting how they present, but the core is always there's a stress somewhere. It's you know, parental and identity stress, financial stress, definitely, you know, trauma that's kind of occurred. So in one sense there's similarities, in other senses it's just the journey towards a mental health need is like, you know, there's definitely some culture stuff, but again, you know, poverty matters, you know what I mean, like what you're facing at home, not feeling yourself, your environment, all of that, that all builds, you know what I mean. And COVID made everyone equal in a sad way. It leveled everything out. You know?
Just to sort of ask you a question, Travis. Kit talked about sort of people, like culture, how how important that is. Let's say you were looking for sort of help. How important is it to you to find somebody of a similar culture, or someone that you identify with?
I think, especially if you're ethnic minority, you need to find someone who can relate to you because everybody's challenges are a bit different, you know, just to do with culture. Like, as for yourself, you go to church, so that's still a subculture that you have to, you know, take into consideration. So I think it's all about just being relatable. You need someone who can break down your barriers and be able to talk candidly with you. So, yeah, I think the relatability is the most important factor when it comes to, you know, having a conversation with somebody.
Okay, yeah. And moving on, how are we seeing this sort of, in terms of the people that you work with, are you able to, are there enough people working in that field, for example, therapists, of like therapists of colour and therapists of different sexualities that can...
Perfect question. So kind of building on what Travis says, like, it matters. Like, who you open up to matters, and it's underrated, because I feel sometimes, the stigma around therapy is people not understanding that you and I didn't get chosen to be born, right? So we just get plotted on land, and now it's a game of luck if you are in a particular part of the world. If you've got parents that understand the mind, if you've got parents that are kind of understand that, over 18 years, you're going to be several people. Whereas the way we all talk, we're like, I can't wait to have a baby. The baby's like a 2-3 year phase. And then they'll be like, I want to have kids. The kids bit is like an 8-year phase. Yeah. Next after that, you got to know how to deal with a human, a straight adult. Do you know what I'm saying? So when we're looking at people that create life, are they paying attention to that? They're in the human management game, And this is why like that relatability kind of matters, which is, well, if I grow up and I look to my left and to my right, and the two people that made me, I don't feel they've got a clue, there comes a point as a human where I'm like, I'm on my own. And this is me kind of speaking for the people that have said, either they've said it straight or they're getting close to it but they can't say it because it's uncomfortable. And that's one of the things about like this area, we're finding that there's a lot of things people want to say, but it's just socially not the normal. Like, it's very weird to tell people that your mum can't cook. If you're a young person, right, you're like, everyone's like, I love my mum's cooking. And if you're that person, you're like, right? So now that in that uncomfortable kind of conversations is the people that we're seeing and who we're talking about, which is, what do you do and where do you go if you kind of don't feel like your parents are the lick? You feel like they're a bit whatless and they've not got a clue and they're not switched on, and everyone else is like, I always turn to my parents, and you're like, well, I can't, right? So for those types of like young people, what's going on there is you need a space where there's someone that can even get that and will allow you to say that without them going, but surely, right? You need people that are going to accept and validate your truth. And in there is why diversity matters in therapy. So one of the big things that we're kicking in with is saying, you get to choose who you have. And if you're not happy with them, you keep swapping until you find it. Because for some people, not a massive range, but it's like dating. Like, you know, we're all very different. So you may have to kiss a few frogs to find the prince. Now, no one talks about that in the mental health world because of the way the money works, it's an uncomfortable conversation. Do you know what I mean? That, wait a minute, not all therapists are the same. Wait a minute, not all doctors are the same. Wait a minute, there's doctors that, although the paperwork's there, they need help too. No one's kind of talking about that, because that's the stuff that we're discovering, that it's not as black and white as therapist human, great, salvation. It's more like therapist human. On this occasion, fantastic, it worked. Next, another occasion, they did not gel well. They need to go back. We need to go back to the drawing board. On another occasion, it was going great, but then life happens to the therapist. Like, the therapist is now not well. We've had young people that their therapist died, which is a whole lot, right? And no one's talking about that because there's a whole other kind of trauma there. So our job is to be so attentive about what it takes to kind of help people, and that's why it's hard work behind the scenes. You can't, but you know, it's not spoken about enough. And kind of then finishing with, that's why representation matters. Like, some people need to have someone that doesn't look like their trauma, which means that for some people it's okay. If for a black male, it's okay for it to be an Asian lady. It's okay for it to be a white lady, young, old, because maybe I need the nurturing factor, but I just don't need to see someone that reminds me of maybe the person that caused the abuse. And then for others, I need to have someone that reminds me of, you know, so-and-so. So I need it to be a black male. I need it to be a black female because it was my granddad or my uncle that I had the best relationships with. So those are the people that I'm more used to opening up with. There's no one rule for all, but diversity and representation matters. And the truth is, there's not enough by proportion. So considering that we know that your psychosocial and your environmental circumstances can predispose you to need more support, or that's why I call it mind management, not just therapy or counseling. But if you've grown around a tough time, you're going to need people that get it. And if by proportion in the UK or in the West, black people tend to be, surrounded by more financial challenges, more housing challenges and all of that, and now we know that COVID has affected us disproportionately, that's code for we're going to need support, and more of us will need people that look like us to support us. So that's kind of one of the key things. Now, is there enough of a supply? Not really. And I feel like this is the next conversation, that if we're going to do the whole, this is part just an individual's thinking, but if we're going to go Black Lives Matter, and we're going to go, we need to have more equality, then we need to start working hard about the supply. Meaning, to what extent do we start to go, okay, who here needs to be a doctor versus who's just as good to maybe think about being a therapist? Who here needs to think, okay, well, you've done your music degree, great, but you might not be Beyonce, but can you come back and be a music therapist, please? Right, you tried your dream, great, it worked, amazing. It didn't work, but please don't then walk into the next McDonald's. Nothing to say there's nothing wrong with McDonald's, but what I'm really saying is, that the community still needs you elsewhere. McDonald's is going to automate that checkout. Humans are not going to automate therapy anytime soon. So let's now talk as a community how we future-proof ourselves and kind of say, well, which of us is going to be of duty? You know what I mean? Who's going to take on that, like, okay, well, let's look at kind of different types of therapies. Because the other thing I know is that we overrepresent in terms of in schools, you don't really see black people, or definitely not black males up top. They're not running the schools, but somehow they're always mentors, right? And they get pulled in to be mentors, right? So the question is then, can we as kind of community start thinking about turning those guys into therapists? Because there's so many.
They're kind of doing the therapy anyway.
Without the paperwork. So how do we start to think strategically and that, because it's I think that there's only so long we can be like, here's the problem. Now it's like, well, what are you, me, next person gonna do to kind of get that? And it goes all the way from, if I see my friends and they're like, man's got to be on road still because and I'm like, bro, but our people need you in a different way. Likewise, next dude's like, I want to be the next Mark Zuckerberg, cool, but can you also make sure somewhere you're thinking about how are we going to help? Because everyone's trying to sell us crypto, and it's like, okay, cool, but is anyone going to do the paperwork to help us in the way that we need? Because if we look to our left and our right, there's still things that we need to solve. The money will solve something, but now it's about a skill. Like, can we now start to you know what I mean? So that's it. We need more representation for sure, and we need to be thinking about how we look at like careers and skills. Like all of you two are kind of like skilled in different ways. I know you've done like sciences, videography. So how does that turn into therapeutic services? Because that's going to matter too. Do you know what I mean? But not enough therapists. We need more, and we need to start thinking strategically about building that.
Okay. Just before we round up, Travis, do you think any solutions? Are there any sort of solutions that you can think of in regards to sort of helping young black men sort of get help or make their skills, help them to be able to utilize their skills in a way that can help other young black males?
I think it's all about, as you said, like changing the mindset. Because like as he was talking about, because we went to the same school. When we went to school, the mentors were basically doing therapy. So why didn't they think about going and getting doing a psychology course or something just to back up? Because a lot of them got treated kind of badly because they didn't last long. Even though they were helping the people, they only stayed for about a year, 2 years, and then they got kicked out. So maybe if they had having the backing of a psychology course or something will help legitimize what they're doing, because they're getting taken for granted at the moment.
And are there any things that you see that like young black men can sort of going into the future can sort of use to help?
I think if we're looking at the average person, I think talk, and not in the classic, talk to someone. I'm also saying tell your truth. Like, we now live in the world where we can't floss too long anymore. Like, and somebody probably needs you to speak up because they're waiting for someone to speak up. So if something ain't right, tell your truth. And let's kind of like understand that that's half of the game. Like, the human brain does work in a particular way. And this is why I think, whether stigma or no stigma, we're kind of disrespecting biology because no one's really educated us. The brain works a bit like a pressure valve, although you can't see the mechanics. When it gets too full, it's game over. So the idea is the brain needs ways to let it out. And whether it's sports, conversation, letting out your aggression, creativity, whatever, just keep doing. Whatever you can, avoid doing less, because the brain actually needs to produce things in order to get it out. It's just the way, that's not even negotiable. The brain needs outlets. And I think sometimes because of other fears, we end up doing the things that, a bit like me going, like I can sit and then I'm going to get a six pack. Biologically, it's just not the way. So I have to respect biology. And that's what I'm saying about the first part about talking. If we're talking about the system, I think when, this is deep now, when we start to think about what our community needs, we need to start to join the dots. How we vote affects how services work. How we have relationships affect how our next lot of young people work, right? So there's things that probably by you, me, taking better accountability and just choosing a bit wisely when I vote. Am I voting thinking about our community's mental health? When I'm kind of, choosing whoever I mate with and create a life with, am I thinking about my future kids' generation of mental health? That's a hard thing, because now I'm moving away from being an animal to being human, right? Just because my biology wants me to like smash something with a big back, and you know what I mean? All of that stuff. Just because my biology wants it doesn't mean my behavior should be the same, because it's like, well, who am I creating a life with? And if we want to stop that cycle, because, hear the conversation. Yeah, I've got 7 kids, but I see them all. You're not getting it, because I see the young people with 4 or 5 brothers, and they're like, that's actually something that I can't really talk about. Like, my dad has got less time for me than there are days of the week. Like, if you put it like that, out of 52 days, like, just by ratio, I can't get the same quality out of that. So we need to think about that as well. And then the rest is, let's build the systems. If we're all going to be all about making money and trapping and all of that, cool. Where are we going to put that funding? Like, where are you going to put a little bit of your extra to sustain the next lot of people and all of that? So there's loads of solutions, but definitely, like, we've got to start to think about tomorrow and beyond, think strategically, pull resources together, and definitely, like, talk. Like, we all have experienced the trauma, you know what I mean? It's real. We've been through it, and that's just some of it. I'm interested in probably coming back later, because there's way, you know what I mean, deeper stories to like kind of nail out. But that's where I'd say we can start to think like, that level.
Thanks, guys. Thank you all for joining us. For joining me, should I say? You heard it here first. Kid's gonna be here again to talk more, so stay tuned. Remember, like, subscribe, click the bell icon for the notifications, and we'll be back. Thank you.